Well, mothers, take heart. You may have a good reason to feel less guilty about working. A new study from Harvard's Business School shows that by some measures, the children of working mothers fare better than those raised by stay-at-home moms. Now, I got to interview the author of that study, Harvard Business School professor Kathleen McGinn, and this is what she had to say about the results.
What we found was that daughters of mothers who were employed at any point in time while the daughter was a child are more likely to be employed. They're more likely to hold supervisory responsibility if they're employed. They work a greater number of hours and they have greater earnings. Sons have always been expected to work and didn't need their mothers as role models about that. Instead, the advantages to sons is that they spend more time with their family. They spend more hours each week caring for family members.
The study examines data from 50,000 respondents in 24 countries around the world. In which country did you see having a working mother had the greatest impact?
Where we see the greatest effects are the bulk of the countries that we call the stagnating moderates. And these are countries where in 2002, the gender attitudes were sort of middling in terms of looking across the world. Those are countries like the US, like Great Britain, Israel, Australia, Spain. And in those countries in 2012, basically gender attitudes still look pretty much like they did in 2002. Those are the countries where we get our biggest effects.
Other studies show that having a mother stay at home, particularly in the early years before the age of 1, can have some positive impacts on the child, particularly academically. What do you make of those studies?
There are some studies from the 80s and 90s that use a single data set that's a data set from the US. And what they find is that when women go back to work in the first year of the child's life, there are short-term effects in terms of this very young child's behavior and academic achievement. Those effects go completely away within a couple of years. They're very short-term. A few years ago, in 2010, a group of psychologists took all of the studies that have been done on the effects of employed moms on young children. And what they found is when you look across all of these studies, the conclusion that you can come to is that there's a slight positive effect in terms of academic achievement and behavioral issues on young children. That effect is strongest for families with lower income, and that the effect is largely in these very, very early years. So there are a couple studies that show some negative effects in the first year. Those studies are somewhere between 20 and 30 years old. If you look across the last 50 years of study, what you find is essentially a slight positive effect.
In 2012, Anne-Marie Slaughter, who is a high-ranking State Department official, wrote an opinion piece in The Atlantic where she essentially said, you can't have it all. You cannot be a highly successful professional and also be a present mother. Do you agree with that?
No one can have it all. The necessity for choices, that's what life is every day. You wake up and you make choices. What our research suggests is that if you want to make a choice to have career be something you put a lot of time and effort into, make that choice. Your kids are going to be just fine.
So just to be clear, what we're seeing with this study is not necessarily that working moms are better than stay-at-home moms. It's just that their children fare better by some measures, not all measures, right?
When we control for all of these things, there's no effect for whether your mom was employed on whether you're happier or not. What it does is it make it more likely that you, as a woman, do the same sorts of things that your mother did, and you, as a man, realize that the household is a place where things are shared. It's really not surprising in a lot of ways. We've known for a long time that people tend to do what their fathers do, right? So when we think about what's the most likely occupation that a man will have, a good predictor is what his father did. So now we're just saying the same thing is true for women. What's the most likely thing a woman's going to do with her life? Well, it's going to look a lot like what her mom did with her life.
A lot of working mothers that I spoke to said they struggle with feelings of guilt. What do you say to them?
So my hope is that we start thinking about ways that we can open up the opportunities for our children to see lots of ways of living as as good ways of living. My other hope is that working moms who are employed, start to see their choice as that's fine. There is essentially no recent research that suggests that working moms should feel guilty about going to work. If anything, they're doing things that benefit their children.